Get ready for an unexpected twist. Before diving into this story of betrayal and triumph, leave a like on this video and subscribe to our channel for more tales that will leave you breathless. Are you ready for the truth? The clinking of champagne glasses usually announces a celebration, but at the annual gala of the Carter Family Foundation, it became the sound of a life shattering. Before the high society of New York, the billionaire patriarch, a man who seemingly had everything, raised his glass. But the woman he toasted was not his wife of 25 years, the mother of his children who had built his empire by his side. It was a woman half his age, a stranger to them all. What followed was not just a scandal, but a war. A war for a name, a fortune, and a family. And the next day, the battle lines would be drawn in the most shocking way imaginable. The toast of treachery. The grand ballroom of the Ritz-Carlton was a symphony of whispers and the soft clink of silverware against fine china. Crystal chandeliers, each the size of a small carriage, poured light over the guests. A veritable who's who of New York's philanthropic and financial elite. At the center of it all, the head of the most prominent table, sat the Carter family. They were the sun around which this brilliant solar system of wealth and influence revolved. Radiating an aura of untouchable power was Robert Carter. At 55, he was a man carved from granite and ambition, with thick, dark hair threaded with silver and eyes the color of a stormy sea. He was a self-made titan of industry, a man who had clawed his way from the humble streets of Queens to the top of New York's real estate world. His company, Carter Investments, owned a significant portion of the city's skyline, and his name was synonymous with audacious deals and ruthless success. He was a king in his kingdom, and tonight was his coronation. By his side, a study in discreet elegance and tense posture, was his wife, Carla Carter. At 50, she remained a striking woman, with classic features, hair the color of spun gold, and eyes of a startling sapphire. Born into an old guard family, she brought a pedigree and social grace that Robert, for all his billions, could never have acquired himself. She was the perfect corporate wife, the silent partner who polished his rough edges, organized his endless dinners, and raised their 2 children while he conquered the world. She wore an emerald green gown that shimmered under the chandeliers, a cascade of diamonds at her throat, Robert's gift for their 25th anniversary. A gift that felt more like a burden with each passing day. The performance had been carefully orchestrated, a series of speeches praising Robert's Midas touch and his supposed magnanimity. Carla had played her part flawlessly, smiling, nodding, and exuding an air of serene pride as she listened to the endless litany of her husband's achievements. But beneath the surface, a cold dread coiled in her stomach. She had noticed the subtle changes in Robert's behavior over the past year, the nights he claimed were business meetings, the secret phone calls he took in his study, the apathetic distance that had replaced the warmth in his eyes. She suspected, of course. A wife always knows. But she clung to a desperate hope that she was wrong, that the foundation they had built together was strong enough to withstand the tremors of his midlife crisis. The main course had been cleared, and waiters now moved with silent efficiency, filling champagne flutes for the final toast of the night. This was Robert's moment, the culmination of the evening's flattery. He was expected to give a heartfelt speech thanking his supporters, his colleagues, and, of course, his beloved family. He was expected to play the role of the benevolent patriarch, the man who had everything and was grateful for it. Robert rose from his chair, a glass of Dom Perignon in hand. A silence fell over the ballroom as all eyes turned to him. He reveled in the attention, a slow, predatory smile spreading across his face. He looked the conquering hero, the master of the universe. He began his speech with the usual platitudes, his voice a deep, confident baritone that resonated with power. He thanked the Foundation's board, the generous donors, the tireless staff. He spoke of his vision for the future, the legacy he intended to build. Carla watched him, her heart a lead weight in her chest. She had heard this speech 100 times before, in 100 different ballrooms. It was a well-rehearsed script, designed to charm and impress. But tonight, something was different. There was a reckless, almost cruel glint in his eyes that she had never seen before. A sense of impending doom rushed over her so strongly that she had to grip the edge of the table to steady herself. Robert paused, taking a slow sip of his champagne. He let the silence hang in the air for a dramatic moment, his eyes sweeping over the sea of expectant faces. And then he did the unthinkable. His gaze drifted away, past Carla, past their children, toward a table in the corner of the room. It was a table of lower-level executives from Carter Investments, the kind of people who usually sit in the back, far from the center of power. But tonight, one of them was about to be thrust into the spotlight. "But there is one more person I need to thank," Robert said, his voice dropping to a more intimate, almost caressing tone. "A person who has brought a new light into my life, a new passion, a new inspiration." A collective gasp ran through the room. Carla's blood ran cold. She followed his gaze. Her eyes landed on a young woman sitting at the corner table. The woman was beautiful in a way that was both obvious and slightly brassy. She had long, jet-black hair, a voluptuous figure squeezed into a tight scarlet dress, and a look of triumphant arrogance on her face. Carla had never seen her before, but she knew with a certainty as sharp and painful as a shard of glass in her heart. This was his replacement. "To Joanna," Robert declared, raising his glass, "for showing me what it truly means to be alive." The name hung in the air, a poisoned dart that found its target in the heart of the Carter family. Joanna. It was a name that would be etched into their memories forever. The silence that followed was deafening. It was a silence filled with awe, outrage, and 1,000 unspoken questions. Guests stared openly. Their eyes moved from Robert to Carla, to the woman in scarlet, who now preened under the spotlight. The carefully constructed facade of the Carter family had shattered, and the raw, ugly truth was now exposed for all to see. For Carla, the world seemed to tilt on its axis. The chandeliers above her blurred into a streak of light. The faces around her became distorted masks of pity and morbid curiosity. The air was thick and heavy, and she felt as if she were drowning. She looked at Robert, at the man she had loved, the man she had built a life with, and saw a stranger. His face was flushed with a mixture of arrogance and defiance. His eyes gleamed with a feverish light. He wasn't just acknowledging his affair. He was celebrating it, boasting about it in the most public and humiliating way possible. Julian was the first to react. He leaped to his feet, his face pale with fury. "What the hell are you doing?" he hissed. His voice trembled with a mixture of rage and disbelief. He looked from his father to the woman in red, a look of pure annoyance on her face. Catherine was frozen in her chair, her eyes wide with horror. Tears welled up in her eyes, and she looked at her mother, her expression a silent plea for this nightmare to end. But Robert was unmoved. He simply smiled, a cold, disdainful smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Sit down, Julian," his voice dangerously calm. "This doesn't concern you." "Doesn't concern me?" Julian's voice rose to a shout, drawing the attention of the surrounding tables. "You're humiliating my mother in front of the entire city and it doesn't concern me?" The scarlet woman, Joanna, seemed to revel in the drama. She rose with a smug smile on her lips and raised her own glass in a mocking toast to Carla. It was a calculated act of cruelty, a declaration of victory, That was the breaking point for Carla. The numbness that had enveloped her began to recede, replaced by a white-hot fury. She rose from her chair with a grace and dignity that belied the turmoil within her. She didn't look at Robert. She didn't look at Joanna. She looked at her children, her eyes filled with a strength and resolve they had never seen before. Without saying a word, she turned and walked away from the table. She moved with a majestic composure, her head held high, her back straight. The emerald dress shimmered around her like armor. She didn't run. She didn't cry. She simply walked with a purpose and finality that was more powerful than any shouted word or shed tear. The entire ballroom watched her go, a silent, collective witness to the execution of a marriage. The murmurs began then, a rising tide of whispers and speculation. The Carter Foundation Gala would be remembered not for its philanthropy, but for the scandal that had erupted at its heart. As Carla walked through the grand lobby of the Ritz, the reality of what had just happened began to sink in. The life she had known for 25 years was over. The man she had loved was gone, replaced by a stranger, cruel and reckless. The future she had imagined was a sterile wasteland. She stepped out into the cool night air, the sounds of the city a dissonant contrast to the suffocating silence of the ballroom. A solitary tear finally escaped, tracing a cold path down her cheek. It was a tear not of sorrow, but of rage. Robert had declared war, and Carla Carter, the quiet, elegant wife, was about to become a warrior. The battle for the Carter name, for her children, for her very identity, had just begun. Stop to reflect. What would you do if you were in Carla's shoes? Do you believe the Carter family will manage to overcome this? Leave your comments and share your predictions. The war begins. The limousine ride back to the Carters' palatial penthouse on Fifth Avenue was a study in suffocating silence. The air, usually filled with the comfortable chatter of a family returning from a successful event, was now dense with a toxic mixture of shock, anger, and a grief so profound it felt like a physical weight. Carla sat bolt upright, her hands tightly clasped in her lap. Her gaze was fixed on the blur of the city lights outside the smoked windows. She was a statue carved in ice, her face a mask of impenetrable composure. The single tear she had shed outside the hotel was the only external sign of the storm raging within her. Julian sat across from her, his jaw so tightly clenched that a muscle pulsed in his cheek. He kept clenching and unclenching his fists, his knuckles white. He was a coiled spring of impotent fury. His eyes moved between his mother's stoic profile and the empty seat beside him, the seat where his father should have been. Robert, in a final act of brazen disrespect, had abandoned the gala with Joanna, their laughter echoing in the marble lobby as they disappeared into a waiting sports car, leaving his family to deal with the fallout of his public betrayal. Catherine was huddled in the corner of the limo, her small body racked by silent sobs. Her face was buried in her hands, her shoulders trembling. The sound of her crying was a heartbreaking counterpoint to the tense silence, a raw, unfiltered expression of the pain they all felt. She was the family's emotional barometer, and at that moment, it pointed to a storm of epic proportions. The doorman of their building, a man who had greeted them with a deferential smile for over a decade, looked away as they stepped out of the car. The news, it seemed, had already traveled faster than the speed of light in the hyper-connected world of the New York elite. The scandal was already a wildfire, and they were at the epicenter of the inferno. The penthouse, always a symbol of their success and a sanctuary from the outside world, now felt like a gilded cage, its opulent furnishings and priceless artwork mocking them with their cold, indifferent beauty. The silence that had filled the car followed them into the apartment, magnifying the cavernous space and making them feel even more empty and desolate. Carla walked directly to the bar, her movements precise and deliberate. She poured herself a generous measure of brandy, her hands steady. She took a long, slow sip, the liquid's burn a welcome heat in her throat. She needed its warmth to fight the icy coldness that had settled deep in her bones. Julian finally broke the silence, his voice a raw, choked whisper. "I can't believe it. I just can't believe he did that. To you, to us." Catherine lifted her head, her face etched with tears, her eyes red and swollen. "How could he, Mom? In front of everyone? Who is that woman?" Carla turned to look at her children. Her expression softened for the first time that night. She saw their pain, their confusion, their shattered illusions, and a fierce, protective love rushed over her. They were the only thing that mattered now. Her name, it seems, is Joanna. Her voice was devoid of emotion. And as for who she is a mistake, a very public and very costly mistake that your father just made. She took another sip of her brandy, her mind already working, calculating, planning. The shock was beginning to wear off, replaced by a cold, lucid resolve. She had been a CEO's wife for 25 years. She knew how to strategize. She knew how to fight. "What are we going to do?" Julian asked, looking to his mother for guidance. His anger gave way to a sense of helplessness. He was used to his father being in control, to making the decisions. Now that foundation had been ripped away from him. "First," Carla said, her voice firm, "we stay united. Your father made his decision. He chose to align himself with that woman. He drew a line in the sand. Now we must draw ours." She walked toward the grand window overlooking Central Park. The city lights were a brilliant tapestry below. She had stood at this window countless times, looking out at the empire she had helped Robert build. Now she was looking at a battlefield. "He thinks he's won," her voice a low, dangerous murmur. "He thinks he can just discard me. Discard us, without consequence. He underestimated me. He underestimated his own children." She turned to them, her sapphire eyes burning with a newfound fire. "This is no longer just about a marriage. It's about our family. It's about our name. It's about everything we built, and I will not let him destroy it." Stop to reflect. What would you do if you were in Carla's shoes? Do you believe the Carter family will manage to overcome this? Leave your comments and share your predictions. The war cry. The next morning, the city woke up to the Carter scandal splashed across the front page of every tabloid and news site. The Scarlet Night of the Carters screamed the headline of the New York Post, accompanied by a grainy photograph of Robert and Joanna leaving the gala, his arm possessively wrapped around her waist. The article was a salacious mix of facts and speculation, detailing Robert's public toast, Carla's dignified exit, and Joanna's mysterious identity. She was painted as a young, ambitious marketing executive from Carter Investments, a viper who had sunk her claws into the billionaire magnate. The penthouse phones began ringing incessantly, a cacophony of calls from concerned friends, gossipy acquaintances, and reporters hungry for a quote. Carla instructed the housekeeper to unplug them. She needed to think, to plan, to prepare for the war ahead. She called her personal lawyer, a shrewd and formidable woman named Sophia Lane, who was also her cousin. Sophia arrived within the hour, her face a mask of grim determination. She was a bulldog in a Chanel suit, and she was fiercely loyal to Carla. They sat in the formal living room, the setting of so many happy family gatherings, now transformed into a war room. Carla, with a clarity that surprised even herself, laid out the events of the previous night, her voice quiet and measured. She didn't cry, she didn't rage. She presented the facts with the detached precision of a surgeon. Sophia listened intently, her pen flying across her legal pad. When Carla finished, she looked up, her expression a mixture of sympathy and fierce resolve. "He is a fool, Carla, a monumental, arrogant fool. But he is a dangerous fool. We need to move quickly and decisively." "I want a divorce," Carla said, the words tasting like ash in her mouth. "But I want more than that. I helped him build this company. My family's money was the seed that started everything. My social connections opened doors for him that would have otherwise been locked. I am not just his wife. I am his partner, and I will not be discarded like old furniture." Sophia's eyes held a predatory gleam. "Under New York law, marital assets are subject to equitable distribution, and we will argue that your contributions to the marriage and the business were significant. We will go for half of everything, Carla. The company, the properties, the art collection, everything." "Good," Carla said. "But there's more. I want to protect the children. Julian's position in the company, Catherine's trust fund. He will try to use them as leverage against me. I know he will. We will file an immediate restraining order to freeze all marital assets," Sophia said. "That will prevent him from moving money or making any major financial decisions without court approval. We will also petition for temporary spousal and child support. We will hit him hard and fast, before he has time to fully comprehend what is happening." While Carla plotted her legal strategy, Julian faced his own battle. He had gone to the office against his mother's advice, determined to confront his father. He found Robert in his corner office, a vast expanse of glass and steel with a panoramic view of the city. He was on the phone, laughing, a sound that made Julian's blood boil. Joanna was perched on the edge of his desk, looking as if she owned the place. She wore a dress even more revealing than the night before, and was sipping a latte from a Carter Investments mug. When Robert saw Julian, his expression hardened. He ended the call and stood up, adjusting his shoulders as if preparing for a fight. "What do you want, Julian?" he asked, his voice cold and disdainful. "I want to know what you were thinking," Julian said, his voice trembling with contained rage. "I want to know how you could do that to Mom," Robert scoffed, a look of pure arrogance on his face. "Your mother and I have been unhappy for years. It was a farce, a business arrangement. It's time for me to be happy. Joanna makes me happy." Joanna smiled a smug, triumphant smile. "Your father is a passionate man, Julian. He needs a woman who can keep up." The condescending tone, the casual dismissal, it was too much for Julian to bear. "You have no idea what you've done," he said, his voice dangerously low. "You've just destroyed this family." "Don't be so dramatic," Robert said, waving a dismissive hand. "It's a divorce. It happens every day. Your mother will be well taken care of. You and Catherine will be fine. Nothing has to change." "Nothing has to change?" Julian's voice rose to a shout. "You just publicly humiliated the woman who stood by you for 25 years, and you think nothing has to change. You've lost your mind." "Watch your tone, Julian," Robert warned, his eyes narrowed. "You're an employee of this company, and I am still your father." "No," Julian said. A sudden, chilling clarity descended upon him. "You are not anymore. The man I called my father would not have done this, would not have been so cruel, so selfish." He took a step back, his decision made in that moment of painful disillusionment. "I quit," he said. The words felt both terrifying and liberating. "I won't work for you. I won't be a part of this circus." He turned and stormed out of the office, ignoring Robert's shout of his name. He walked past the curious glances of the other employees, the whispers, and the pitying looks. He left Carter Investments, the company he once believed was his birthright, and didn't look back. Meanwhile, Catherine was fighting her own, more subtle war. She had spent the morning on the phone, not with friends, but with the trustees of the Lima Family Foundation, the charitable organization established by her maternal grandparents. She was a junior board member, a post she had always taken seriously. She knew the inner workings of the foundation and knew where the pressure points were. She spoke with her great-aunt, the formidable matriarch of the Lima clan, a woman who had never fully approved of Robert Carter. Catherine, with a passion and eloquence that belied her age, painted a vivid picture of Robert's public betrayal, his cruelty, his disrespect for the family name. She spoke not just as a distraught daughter, but as a Lima defending the honor of her lineage. When she hung up the phone, the gears were in motion. The Lima family, a powerful and influential force in their own right, was mobilizing. They were severing ties with Robert, both personal and professional. They were withdrawing their support from his ventures, closing doors that had once been wide open. They were, in their quiet, devastating way, declaring war on Robert Carter. When Julian returned to the penthouse, pale but resolute, he found his mother and sister in the living room. He told them what he had done, that he had quit his job, that he had walked away from his father. Carla looked at him with a fierce pride in her eyes. "You did the right thing, Julian." Her voice was filled with emotion. "You chose your family. You chose your integrity." Catherine then told them about her own calls, about the Lima family's response. A small, grim smile touched Carla's lips. The battle lines were being drawn, and she was not fighting alone. The next day, the family gathered in the living room, a united front against the storm that was about to break. Sophia arrived with a mountain of paperwork, the first salvos of their legal war. The divorce petition, the restraining order to freeze assets, the request for support. It was all there, ready to be filed. As they reviewed the documents, the doorman called. "Mr. Carter is on his way up," he announced, his voice tense. A cold silence fell over the room. Carla looked at her children, her expression unreadable. "Let him come," she said, her voice quiet. "It's time for a family meeting." Robert stormed into the apartment a few minutes later, his face a thundering mask of rage. He was not used to being challenged. He was not used to his authority being questioned. He was a king who had just discovered his kingdom was in revolt. He looked at Sophia, at the pile of legal documents on the coffee table. "What is this?" he demanded, his voice a low growl. "It is a divorce petition, Robert," Carla said, her voice as cold and clear as ice. "And a restraining order to freeze all our assets. You will not spend another penny of our money on that woman." Robert's face contorted with fury. He turned to Julian. "And you pathetic, ungrateful boy, you abandoned my company, your future." "I abandoned you," Julian corrected, his voice firm. "I chose my mother. I chose my family." Robert then directed his anger at Catherine. "And you went crying to your old relatives, turning them against me?" "I told them the truth," Catherine said, her voice unbroken. "You are the one who sought it." Robert looked from one defiant face to another, a dawning comprehension in his eyes. He expected them to crumble. He expected them to be weak, to be dependent on him. He never imagined they would stand together, that they would fight. He let out a harsh, humorless laugh. "You think you can win this? You think you can take me on? I built this empire. I am Robert Carter." "And I am Carla Carter," she said, her voice quiet, but filled with an unwavering strength. "And these are our children. You made a decision, Robert. You chose her." She made a vague gesture toward the city, a dismissive flick of her hand. "And now we make our decision. We choose each other. We choose this family." The battle had begun. The lines had been drawn. And in the opulent penthouse, overlooking Central Park, the Carter family, minus its patriarch, stood united, ready to face the storm. The next day had arrived, and the family had chosen. They had chosen her. They had chosen Carla. They had chosen themselves. And Robert Carter, the king who so carelessly discarded his queen, was about to discover that he no longer ruled a kingdom, but a wasteland of his own creation. The war had just begun, and the casualties had yet to be counted. Stop to reflect. What is your opinion of the defiance of Carla and her children? Was it the best strategy, or should they have been more cautious? The price of arrogance. The weeks that followed the fateful dinner were a whirlwind of legal maneuvering, public scrutiny, and a profound seismic shift in the Carter family universe. The battle that Robert had so arrogantly instigated was now a full-scale war, fought not on a battlefield of mud and steel, but in the sterile conference rooms of law offices, in the gossip columns of the city's tabloids, and in the whispering, judging circles of the New York elite. Robert, accustomed to a world that bent to his will, was stunned by the ferocity and unity of the opposition. He had expected Carla to be a tearful, broken woman, begging for reconciliation or a discreet, generous settlement. He had expected his children to be petulant but ultimately obedient, their reliance on his wealth a leash he could easily pull. He had fundamentally misjudged them, and that miscalculation was proving costly. The restraining order freezing his assets was the first major blow. It was a strategic masterpiece by Sophia Lane, a legal chokehold that brought Robert's financial life to a grinding halt. Suddenly, every major transaction, every fund transfer, required court approval. His plan to set Joanna up in a luxurious multi-million-dollar apartment and cover her with the kind of extravagant gifts that would solidify her position as the new woman in his life was abruptly thwarted. He was a king with a treasure temporarily locked away, and the humiliation was exquisite. He retaliated, as was his nature, with brute force. He assembled a legal team of the city's most ruthless and expensive lawyers, attorneys known for their scorched earth tactics. They filed a counter motion, accusing Carla of being a gold digger, a woman who had lived a life of luxury at his expense and was now trying to bleed him dry. They painted her as a cold, calculating woman who had been emotionally distant for years, a wife in name only. It was a smear campaign designed to hurt and intimidate. But Carla, fueled by the unwavering support of her children and the formidable Sophia, refused to be cowed. She had spent 25 years in Robert's shadow, her own intelligence and strength sublimated for his ego. Now that shadow was gone, and she was stepping into the light, discovering a resilience she never knew she possessed. The public narrative that Robert had assumed he could control was also turning against him. His brazen toast to his mistress had been a public relations disaster, a display of arrogance so breathtaking that it alienated even his most fervent supporters. The story of Carla's dignified exit, of her children's loyalty, had captured the city's imagination. She was portrayed as the wronged woman, the elegant matriarch standing up for her family's honor. He was the villain, the callous billionaire who traded in his loyal wife for a younger, flashier model. The other woman, Joanna, was also discovering that her victory was not as sweet as she had imagined. She was vilified in the press, labeled a homewrecker and a social climber. The wives of Robert's friends and business partners, women who had once been her colleagues or superiors, now looked at her with undisguised contempt. She was a pariah, a scarlet woman in a city that valued loyalty and discretion above all else. The war for the Carter Empire was also being fought on a more personal and perhaps more painful front. Robert, enraged by his children's defiance, began tightening the screws. He cut off their credit cards, a petty act of retaliation that was more symbolic than financially devastating. He sent a dry, formal letter to Catherine, informing her that he would no longer contribute to her tuition at NYU. He tried to forbid Julian from going to the family's country house in the Hamptons, a place filled with memories of a life that once was. But for every move he made, Carla had a counterattack. She used her own personal funds, a substantial inheritance from her parents that Robert had never been able to touch, to cover Catherine's tuition. And she reminded Robert, through Sophia, that the Hamptons house was a marital asset, and he had no legal right to prohibit his own son from entering the property. The children, in turn, were discovering their own strengths in the crucible of this family crisis. Julian, freed from the suffocating pressure of his father's expectations, began exploring his own interests. He had always had a passion for sustainable architecture, an idea Robert had dismissed as tree-hugger nonsense. Now he began taking online courses, contacting people in the field, and even sketching plans for his own small, eco-friendly development company. He was finding a purpose that was entirely his own, a sense of self-worth that was not tied to the Carter name or his father's approval. Catherine, always the family's conscience, channeled her anger and grief into her activism. She became even more involved in her art history studies, focusing on the role of female artists who had been overlooked or marginalized by their male counterparts. She saw a parallel in her mother's story, and it fueled her passion. She organized a student art exhibition on campus that showcased the work of emerging female artists and dedicated it to her mother. It was a small act of defiance, but it was a powerful statement of her loyalty and her values. The confrontation continued for months, a tense and bitter war of attrition. The lawyer bills mounted, the emotional toll increased, and the chasm within the family deepened into an impassable gorge. Robert, isolated and increasingly paranoid, became more and more reliant on Joanna. But the foundation of their relationship, built on a reckless impulse and a shared desire for a certain type of lifestyle, began to show cracks. Joanna was growing impatient. The life of a pampered billionaire's mistress was not materializing as she had imagined. The frozen assets meant the shopping sprees, the lavish trips, the jewelry were all on hold. She was living in a luxury hotel, a gilded cage, but she was not the owner of a penthouse on Fifth Avenue. She was a woman in limbo, and the constant public scrutiny was beginning to wear her down. She wanted to be a queen, but she was starting to feel more like a pawn in a game she didn't fully understand. The turning point came during a deposition for the divorce case. It was the first time Carla and Robert had been in the same room since that fateful night in the penthouse. The air in the conference room was thick with animosity, a palpable, living thing. Robert's lawyers, true to their reputation, came out swinging. They questioned Carla about her spending habits, her social life, her role as a mother. They tried to paint her as a frivolous, distant woman who had contributed nothing to the marriage except her pedigree. Carla, quiet and poised, answered their questions with an understated dignity that infuriated them. She had her own secret weapon, a collection of meticulously kept journals she had maintained for 25 years. It was a detailed record of her life with Robert, a chronicle of the dinners she had hosted, the business trips she had planned, the clients she had wooed, and the personal sacrifices she had made. When it was Sophia's turn to cross-examine Robert, she was relentless. She presented evidence of his extravagant spending on Joanna, his attempts to hide assets, his emotional cruelty toward his wife and children. Robert, under oath, was forced to admit his infidelity, his lies, his callous disregard for his family. But the most devastating blow came when Sophia began questioning him about the earliest days of his company. She displayed old financial records, ancient loan agreements, and personal letters Carla had saved. She exposed in painstaking detail how the seed money for Carter investments had not come from Robert's own pocket, but from a trust fund established by Carla's grandfather. She showed how Carla's family connections had secured him his first major development deal, a deal that was the stepping stone to his entire empire. Robert, for the first time in his life, was speechless. The narrative he had so carefully constructed, the myth of the self-made man, was crumbling around him. He was not just a philanderer, he was a fraud. He had built his kingdom on a foundation of his wife's money and her family's influence. The news of the deposition, of the revelations about the origins of Robert's fortune, sent shockwaves through the business community. His reputation, already tainted, was now in tatters. His business partners began to distance themselves. His stock price wavered, and the empire he had built with such ruthless determination began to look vulnerable. For Robert, it was the ultimate humiliation. Losing his family, his reputation, and now he was in danger of losing his company. He was a king without subjects, without allies, and with no one to blame but himself. Joanna, seeing the writing on the wall, made her move. She realized the Carter ship was sinking, and she had no intention of going down with it. She gave an exclusive interview to a sensationalist magazine, painting herself as a victim, a naive young woman who had been seduced and manipulated by an older, powerful man. She portrayed Robert as a Svengali figure, a man who had promised her the world and then left her with nothing. It was a calculated act of self-preservation, a desperate last attempt to salvage her own reputation at his expense. The interview was the final nail in Robert's coffin. He was now not just a villain, but a pathetic one. A man who had been outmaneuvered by his wife, abandoned by his children, and now publicly betrayed by his mistress. He was alone, isolated in his tower of glass and steel, a king without a court, without allies, and with no one to blame but himself. In the end, he had no choice but to surrender. He agreed to a settlement, one that was far more generous to Carla than he ever imagined. She received a significant portion of his fortune, the penthouse on Fifth Avenue, the Hamptons house, and a substantial stake in Carter Investments. It was not just a victory, it was a vindication. Carla, Julia, and Taras and Catherine stood together on the penthouse balcony, looking out at the city that was once again theirs. The war was over. They were hurt, they were scarred, but they were whole. They had faced the storm and emerged not unscathed, but stronger, more united, and with a clearer sense of who they were and what they valued. Carla Carter, the woman who had been publicly discarded, had not only survived, she had triumphed. She had reclaimed her name, her fortune, and her family. She was no longer just the wife of a billionaire. She was the matriarch of a new Carter dynasty, one built not on ruthless ambition and public spectacle, but on loyalty, integrity, and the enduring power of family. The battle had been won, not with a shout, but with a quiet, unwavering resolve. And in the end, that had been the most powerful weapon of all. Moment of truth. What did you think of Carla's journey from a scorned wife to a powerful matriarch? Do you believe Robert got what he deserved in the end? We'd love to hear your thoughts and opinions in the comments below. If this story resonated with you, please give this video a like. Share it with someone who appreciates a tale of strength and resilience. And don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more captivating stories like this. Your support helps us continue to bring these narratives to life. Thank you for listening.